Alright, so hello and welcome back. So today we're going to be reacting to the new Simple History Weird Tanks in History. I haven't seen this and I'm pretty interested. Give you my opinion on it as a military historian. Also, this should be one of the last few videos that I have this bullshit set up getting a green screen, so maybe it will improve. I don't know. Anyway, on to the video.
Weirdest tanks in history. From tanks so narrow that they rocked when they fired from a lateral position, to tanks made with scrap metal and no blueprints, to 100-ton colossal tanks capable of blowing holes through concrete. Wartime innovation has driven engineers to develop new tanks capable of meeting the challenges created on an ever-changing battlefield. Beginning with Leonardo da Vinci over 500 years ago, tank design, function, and aesthetics have dramatically changed with new developments in warfare. The world has also seen some pretty weird, odd, and downright impractical tank designs over this period. So here are 5 of the weirdest tank designs to ever be seen in the 20th century. The STRV-74.
Is it bad that I know every single tank there, even the little Russian four-track vehicle? We got the T-95, we got the Bob symbol, we got the Abrams, and I didn't know what this one was, so the STRV-74 probably means it was made in 1974.
Exactly 8 feet in width, the Stridsvagn 74 was the result of Sweden's post-World War II effort to develop and modernize the Stridsvagn M42, a light tank which had been in service since April 1943. By keeping the chassis of the Stridsvagn M42 and replacing its turret with a completely new design that would house the 7.5-centimeter Evcon M36 heavy anti-aircraft gun, which was capable of penetrating 260mm armor at an angle of 90 degrees at point-blank range. Sweden's military avoided the long process of designing a new tank, which could take up to 7 years to develop.
Yeah, there's a lot what people forget is that development of tanks in World War II was extremely fucking fast. However, the Tiger was already in development before the war, technically, and so were the Panzer IV, Panzer III, Panzer II, Panzer One. It takes a very long time for you to develop tanks, and even with wartime pushing you ahead very fast, it still takes a while. So yeah, 7 to 10 years is honestly that's not that long, especially if you're not at war. Now, they're using a very old design. If the chassis was from 43, I think they said, they're trying to modernize it for the Cold War. It's probably not going to go very fucking well because there's a massive jump between World War II tech and after very quickly.
Old Stridsvagn M42 turrets were stripped off and set into concrete bases to form static fortifications along the country's coastline, leaving the new, updated Stridsvagn 74 with novel, heavily sloped turrets that gave the tank a futuristic appearance. The tracks of the tank had to be slightly widened to accommodate such an upgrade in firepower. An industrial Volkswagen engine at the back of the turret provided power through an electric generator. But it was the impressive Scania Vebis 607 engines which allowed this tank to get up to speeds approaching 30 miles an hour. However, crews operating the tank often complained of the narrow, high profile which caused the whole tank to rock when the gun was fired at the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock lateral positions, and they would often refer to it as senseless, which translates into senseless.
Yeah, that's not very good if your fucking tank is rocking that much when you shoot a gun. Now, okay, for a light tank shooting a gun sideways, usually you're trained not to do that for a variety of fucking reasons, but one of them is, again, recoil is going to make the thing jolt. But it's really not good if your tank goes fucking airborne. Again, if you fucking jolt the tank sideways, again, everything inside is not going to stay still. It's going to move, but the people don't move, right? So then all of the side shit is going to hit you in the side of the head as they showed, right? It's really fucking bad.
Which translates into senseless. Like all other Swedish tanks in service during the Cold War, the Stridsvagn 74 never actually saw action, so it's impossible to comment on how they would have fared in battle. Although it had a powerful gun that was mounted in a mantlet that had superior depression and elevation firing angles, it only had poor armor protection that, combined with its high profile, would have made it very vulnerable on the battlefield.
Now, okay, the height is a problem. The light armor is not really. Again, this thing, if it's 74, let's just assume it was built in 74. Although it's probably like the 60s it was probably built. Anyway, the Leopard 1 that came after that Germany used basically had no fucking armor and had the magazine in the front of the tank, okay? by that point, heat rounds were around, and heat could go through everything. And the thinking of the time was, well, if it could go through everything, there's no point in adding armor besides to stop, auto cannons and machine guns. So they just ditched the armor entirely, um, which is good for that time period. Okay, I'm assuming this is what the Swedish did. But the tank again, if it's too high, like the Sherman, then you have problems of getting hit. Again, it has good depression and elevation, so it can fight from a defensive position, which is what Sweden's whole thing was. But the height would be a problem. The no armor is not necessarily a problem at this period because armor became irrelevant for a couple decades. But yeah.
Have you ever wanted to build your own tank? Has someone told you it would take up too much space in the garage? Now is your chance to face off against friends and enemies alike in the ultimate, immersive, free-to-play, and cross-platform vehicular war game War Thunder. Using a collection of vehicles spanning over 100 years of development, starting from the 1920s. With intense PvP battles at various immersion levels for all playstyles, you will find an action-packed and tactical experience. Choose your battle and emerge victorious. Available on PS5, Xbox Series X and S, PC, and last-gen consoles. You can fight across the world in PvP combined arms battles, choosing from over 2,000 vehicles. Staring down the enemy from your plane, tank, helicopter, or warship has never felt so real as in War Thunder, thanks to the soldiers who confirmed the accuracy of all details. And when you damage your opponent, use your damage X-ray to show the literal damage it received. Also battle accurate. This soldier recommends trying the early Merlin Spitfire for the ultimate World War II flying experience in unbelievable graphic detail and 4K resolution. Sign up for your free account today.
The Bob Semple tank. During World War II, New Zealand's Minister of Works, Bob Semple, decided his country needed defending against the potential threat of a Japanese invasion. Only able to use whatever materials were at hand, Semple designed a lightweight tank constructed out of corrugated iron and tractor parts, never bothering to draw any blueprints or formal plans. After the fall of France in 1940, Britain had lost most of its tanks and equipment and was unable to send any military hardware to New Zealand, nor anywhere else in fact, so Semple encouraged the civilian population to help him manufacture his design. The tank could be constructed in hours, as a tank structure was simply bolted on to a tractor base.
Yeah, and you can already see why this is going to be not that great of a fucking tank. It has no real main cannon, and yeah, they basically get whatever armor they can, which is basically just fucking sheet metal, and strap it to a tractor.
Equipped with 6 Bren machine guns, the tank performed very poorly in field tests and was never widely produced or used in battle. To Semple's credit, he worked his design out from an article he had read in an American magazine and was keen in providing some sort of weapon to help defend his country. When the public openly ridiculed his design, he simply responded, "I don't see anyone else coming up with any better ideas."
That is a pretty good idea. It's like, well, no one else is coming up with anything, and I did something.
The American T28 tank. Towards the end of World War II, the Americans designed the T28 Super Heavy tank, which weighed nearly 100 tons and was originally intended to smash through the German defenses of the Siegfried Line in 1944. With its 105mm T5E1 gun, capable of inflicting heavy damage on concrete and heavy fortifications. However, by the time the tank was ready for action, the Allied forces had already broken through the German lines, and the tank was sidelined. 4 tracks instead of the usual 2 would have been used to propel the 15-foot wide machine forward. There were no bridges or infrastructure at the time that could have withstood the weight of the T-28 tank, so it was largely accepted to be an impractical design.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to drive a 100 fucking ton tank over a bridge. That's not. If I was gonna do that, the fucking hatch would be out, and my God, I really wouldn't want to do that. Yeah, no bridge, which is what people don't really think about. Is all these tanks that the Germans made, they were like 75 tons and whatever such tonnage. They could only go through very, very high structure bridges, which means that if they achieved a breakthrough in a sector that like was on a river and they could get a pontoon across, they can't bring the fucking King Tigers across. They can't. It would take too long to get the bridges set up to do so. That's basically what the Americans found out with the Pershing. They could get the Shermans across. They couldn't get the Pershings across for another like 2 or 3 days. Good lord, a 100-ton tank, yeah.
However, its firepower was impressive, with a casemate-style hull taking the place of a turret and housing a large anti-tank gun that could effectively hit targets 12 miles away, in addition to a 50 caliber M2 Browning machine.
I don't know about effectively hitting a target 12 miles away. You could definitely hit a target 12 miles away with a lot of error.
machine gun. With armor plating up to 12 inches thick, the T28 could also absorb other tank rounds with ease. Ultimately, though, the sheer size of this tank would be its biggest weakness, as it could only travel at speeds of up to 8 miles an hour, and it experienced numerous difficulties in crossing any terrain effectively.
Yes, and they also found this damn project in the middle of a farm, literally out back of a farm in the United States of America, where they lost it. Go check out the Chieftain's Hatch if you want more info on that. But yeah, they basically lost this tank in a farm for like 50, 60 years.
The Object 279 tank. Developed in the late 1950s by Soviet engineer L. Trionov, Object 279 was a tank with some serious expectations to fill. It had to be both capable of covering terrain otherwise inaccessible to conventional armored vehicles, and strong enough to survive the shockwave of a nuclear explosion. The resultant tank design looked like something from the U.S. top-secret Nevada desert base known as Area 51. With an elliptical shield covering the entire hull, which at times could be up to 10.5 inches thick, the tank's armor was resilient to shockwaves.
10.5 inches thick is fucking insane, by the way, in case you don't realize for armor-wise, that's insane.
Heat projectiles and equipped with CBRN protection. A 4-track running gear was mounted on 2 rectangular beams, which also functioned as fuel tanks, powering a huge diesel engine, which could get the machine moving at speeds of up to 34 miles an hour and a range of 186 miles before refueling. Armed with both a 130mm M65 rifled gun and a KPVT coaxial machine gun, Object 279 was also capable of neutralizing enemy threats on the ground. However, as with the American T28 tank, Soviet engineers realized the size of Object 279 made it both difficult to manufacture and deploy, so it was abandoned by the 1960s. The STRV-103. Studying armored vehicle casualty reports from the Korean War and World War II, Sweden's military found that there was a strong positive correlation between a tank's height and its risk of being hit on the battlefield.
Which makes sense, right? If you're fucking tanking, if you play, not giving like definitive example, go play War Thunder and you will see that the Sherman is decent, but its height is a problem. Decent protection at low tiers, but the bigger you get, the easier you are to see, the easier you are to fucking hit. So again, this does make sense. And again, modern times, the only reason the Sherman was really this fucking tall was 1, the engine, and 2, the driver was sitting in an L, right? So upright. When we reclined the driver and lowered the engine deck, because we had better engines, that's when tanks got fucking smaller, which is what they could do here. And then when basically a smaller tank is easier to hide and not get hit, which is the whole Soviet doctrine of why the drivers are very small. It's one of the reasons.
In the mid-1950s, a call went out to manufacturers for a tank design which would drastically shorten the profile. By eliminating the turret, Sven Berg, a mechanical engineer at the Swedish Arms Administration, was able to bring the height of the Stridsvagn 103 tank down to just 7 feet. But the drawbacks of this dramatic redesign presented many difficulties. First, the gun itself, a Bofors L74 10.5cm L62 rifled gun, had to be fixed to the hull as there was no turret. In practice, this would mean that it was impossible to use a stabilized gun that fired on the move, meaning the tank would have to come to a complete stop in order to fire accurately. The 3-man crew inside the tank could dispense 1 round every 3 seconds from the rifled gun, giving it an advantage over its most likely opponent, the Soviet T-62. In addition to this, the tank was powered by 2 different types of engines. One 240 horsepower Rolls-Royce opposed piston diesel engine, which allowed it to slowly cruise and maneuver into position, and one Boeing 502 turbine, which was a powerful installment that could propel the tank close to 40 miles an hour over severe terrain.
Now, what you're seeing here is so they realize that obviously not having a turret is a pretty big fucking drawback. But your reload could be faster, is what they're saying. And the fact that you can do like this depression kind of thing, again, is not. The Koreans and the Japanese, I believe, have some tanks that can do this, but American doesn't. But only a very few tanks, and especially back in the 60s and 70s, this was brand new technology. But basically, if it comes up to like an impasse, like a slight hill, what it can do is tilt the entire hull up or down, and then be able to get the barrel up or down, and then be able to shoot. That's basically how it was able to do low depression shots, because again, it can't actually move its barrel down that far. So
could propel the tank close to 40 miles an hour over severe terrain. Interestingly, driving gear located at the back of the tank enabled the vehicle to be driven in reverse while maintaining all previous speed capabilities. The Swedish
Yes, and this was something they wanted. Basically they shoot and then they basically reverse out very quickly, move to a new position, shoot again. At least that was a doctrine for Sweden at the time, and it makes sense. Again, most tanks don't have a reverse speed of jack shit. The Americans have decent mobility. The Soviets and now Russia. I don't know about the T90 and the new T10. I think it's what's it called, the new T14 Armada and the T90. I don't know. I think their backwards gears are pretty good, but the T72, my god, if that thing has to go backwards, it's fucking over.
previous speed capabilities. The Swedish Stridsvagn 103 tank was classified as an assault tank, a fully amphibious machine that could be fitted with a flotation screen in under 20 minutes, and capable of leading devastating counter-offensives. However, as it never saw combat, one can only guess at its effectiveness.
And the reason they emphasize this floating screen is because Sweden has a lot of lakes and rivers and ponds that they need to cross in their terrain. So this tank works very well in Sweden. Again, because of the amount of trees, a turret is actually not ideal for the type of terrain they were trying to fight in. Again, a turret would be better, but they figured, no, we're going to have a tank that just has one barrel so you can't get fucking stuck on all these trees and stuff, right? So that was the thinking.
Bob Semple's tank, the American T28 tank, both the Swedish Stridsvagn 103 and Stridsvagn 74 tanks, and Object 279 might all look wildly different from each other, but they all had one thing in common. None of them ever saw combat. Whether it was production issues, design flaws, or just bad timing, each of these tanks remained exercises in engineering, sidelined in practice fields and without glory. Nevertheless, one recognizes the importance of these tanks when one considers the unique history behind each of them. Each model was designed to address a very specific threat on the battlefield, from the extremely low profile of the Stridsvagn 103 to the 100-ton American T28. The history of tanks is closely linked to the history of warfare, as engineers labored tirelessly to win military contracts requiring increasingly demanding specifications. New suspension systems, turret designs, engine capabilities, and a plethora of other mechanical innovations were born out of necessity to satisfy armies competing with each other in a race for the best technology. While these tanks never saw the battlefield, their weird designs ensured their memory would never be forgotten.
To play war.
That's the end of the video. So yeah, again, each one of these tanks had a specific requirement that they were trying to fulfill. It's just they didn't work for a variety of reasons, or they were never used in case of most of the Swedish tanks. But yeah, pretty good video. So, hope you guys liked that video. Leave me a like if you did. The original video is in the description, along with my Patreon if you liked that. Otherwise, I will see you people next time.